Coming up on today's episode.
Every situation that people find themselves in is different. I get asked, who comes to food banks? And the reality is that anybody and everybody can come to a food bank. COVID taught us that perfectly. People who never in their wildest dreams thought that they might ever turn to a food bank. And I think in a way that does prove but what they can do, in that when somebody has the rug pulled from under them, we can step in. Don't accept food banks as normality. Don't accept the conditions that people live in as normal. Do what it takes to change that. There is something really powerful about spending your time with other people who have chosen to do what they're doing. We're all there because we want to be there, and it's really nourishing.
Welcome to The Changemakers, a new podcast shining a light on the people who dedicate their careers to changing the lives of others. I'm Lydia Parkin.
And I'm Claire Edwards.
We're both former journalists who now work in the third sector.
In this podcast, we will talk to society's fixers, menders, mopper-uppers and fighters about why they do their job, what they see in their work and why it matters. This is a commentary on our world and the lives of the often unsung heroes within it, who can only do their work because members of the public choose to support them through donations or fundraising activity.
To them, their job may just be that, their job. But to us, it's remarkable what they do and achieve every day. Their stories deserve to be heard. Sophie Durlacher is the director of Uttlesford Foodbank, which is the branch of Trussell Trust network situated in a rural spot of northwest Essex, and includes the market town of Saffron Walden. Sophie oversees a team of mostly volunteers who produce emergency food parcels for people in crisis. A volunteer herself, Sophie opted out of being paid for her role. She is responsible for managing the rising demand for their services, the logistics, raising awareness and fundraising too. Let's welcome to the podcast, Sophie.
Could you talk us through your journey to the role that you're in now? What led you to it, please?
As soon as I heard about food banks, I thought that's something I want to be involved in. It just appealed to me. It's quite a, feeding people is a basic thing. It's quite a primal thing. And I was just interested in it. And when my child was small, I remember I found out, how to do a reverse advent calendar, and I did that. That's, nearly 15 years ago. And we did that, but I didn't know where to give it because there wasn't any publicity around the food bank here. And then I saw an advert by a sort of 6 degrees of separation for a manager at the food bank. And I had just stopped working and I thought, I'll apply for that, and applied for that. And somebody else they'd already got somebody on board, but they said, do you want to come and help us we need a website. We need some marketing. We've never done that before. Do you want to come and do that? And I went, yeah, sure. And I'm still here 6 years later.
And what is day-to-day life like at the food bank? Could you talk us through an average day, what you kind of see and experience there?
It's interesting because day-to-day, essentially it should be the same thing in that we get food in, we sort food, we pack food, and we give food to people. But my day, no day is the same. Every single day is different in that a lot of what I do is firefighting, and the things that come across my desk are generally the more challenging things. So more challenging clients or issues. We have 100 volunteers. So when you're managing 100 volunteers, that comes with its own set of challenges. Our clients are vulnerable, which comes with another set of challenges. And and we've grown an awful lot. So an awful lot of what I do at the moment is change management. I still like to keep in touch with our clients and with the immediate needs, because you have to always bear that in mind with everything you're doing. So even if you're, going to meet with a corporate donor, you're still, it's always good to then be brought down to earth by a phone call from somebody who needs something. Because that's why we're doing what we're doing.
What have you got out of volunteering, and why would you encourage others to become a volunteer?
It's something really powerful about spending your time with other people who have chosen to do what they're doing. We're all there because we want to be there, and it's really nourishing. Our volunteers, they're just amazing human beings, and they work so hard, and you might suddenly need something doing, and we just put the clarion call out there, and they never ever they never back down. They're just always there, and they are always brilliant fun. And when we have new volunteers coming in, they'll do one session and you always just get an email going, that was amazing. They're just a phenomenal gang of people who love what they're doing. And so just being in that atmosphere, it's just really good for your soul.
Can you give us an example of a situation that perfectly demonstrates why we need food banks?
Every situation that people find themselves in is different. And I get asked, what are the people who comes to food banks? And the reality is that anybody and everybody can come to a food bank. COVID taught us that perfectly. People who never in their wildest dreams thought that they might ever turn to a food bank. And I think in a way that does prove, not necessarily why we need food banks, but what they can do, in that when somebody has the rug pulled from under them, we can step in. We can't cure anybody's structural issues, and we can't help with their addiction, and we can't mend your relationship if you're that's broken down. But people who find themselves in very sudden need, we can step in, and we are extremely reactive in that if you need help, we can provide that help there and then. Whereas quite often, if people are dealing with lots and lots of issues and they're having to engage with different agencies and maybe their utility providers and levels of bureaucracy, that all takes time and is demanding of them at a time when maybe they don't have that much to give of themselves. Whereas they can need food, we'll give them food, and that hole is then plugged for that short period of time.
And you're clearly very passionate about what you do. Do you personally feel impacted by what you witness?
So I've been doing it for quite a long time now. So I think I don't get sad anymore. Sometimes you still do, and you can't ever predict the cases that will impact you. And what I've learned is that every now and then somebody comes, you come across somebody and you get involved in their case to a greater or lesser degree. And sometimes if they really affect me, and you're like, I just want to take them home and make everything better. And that's the point at which you have to stop. The moment that you feel affected or wanting to do more than your role is when you go, right, hang on, there's going to be somebody professional out there who's actually a lot more, empowered to help this person. What I'm good is helping a lot of people a little bit. And so the moment I feel that I'm more involved is the point at which you take a step back and go, okay, who can I call upon to get the more intensive help. But that's a difficult learning curve you have to go on when you do these kinds of roles.
Because it sounds on the face of it very straightforward, doesn't it? You come to the food bank, you get your food parcel, but actually for a lot of people, I imagine the emotional difficulty of doing that is extremely high, of walking up to somewhere like that.
Since COVID, we don't have clients coming in anymore, so we deliver all our food. But when we had clients coming in, you would sometimes have people sitting in their cars for 40 minutes before they could come in, and by the time they're coming in, they're shaking or crying, or crying with stress or crying with relief, because it's a massive step to undertake, whether it's because you're embarrassed completely unnecessarily. And the one thing that our volunteers are brilliant at is taking that stigma away and normalizing your experience there, so that you just don't, by the time you leave, hopefully you feel a lot better. But then also for some people it's relief, because they're walking into somewhere with warm, friendly people who make them feel better.
Do you think the public perception of food banks has changed in more recent times? I'm thinking of Marcus Rashford, Martin Lewis, talking very publicly and openly about food poverty. Have you seen that shift in your, was it 6 years in the role?
When I started, there wasn't a perception. And I'm just going to stop you as well on what you said there about food poverty, because it's not food poverty, it's poverty, full stop. And I think when you talk about food poverty, and that's what the press talks about, is that you're actually kind of diverting the issue away, in that it is simply an issue of income. And it's not like you can kind of, you don't divide up your poverty into people talk about period poverty and fuel poverty and food poverty, and it's all the same thing. It's just people don't have enough money in their pockets and are having to make choices and decisions that they shouldn't have to make. So I think that I don't think there was a perception, because I think food banks were something hidden and not known about. Certainly when I started, a vast proportion of people in Uttlesford were not aware that there is a food bank. Hopefully that's changed. That's an awful lot of the work that we've done, is in getting our message out there. And I think the media portrayal of people who visit food banks serves the media quite well, and doesn't. There is no one person who visits a food bank. So there's been a lot in the press recently about nurses visiting food banks, or people on £35,000 visiting food banks. Well, if you earn £35,000 and you're on an enormous amount of debt, or you earn £35,000 and your partner's just left you, and with no way of existing, you can have no cash in the bank to get food that week, and so it doesn't matter what your material circumstances are on the surface. If you're hungry and your family need to be fed, they need to be fed. It's just end of story. So I think again, COVID did a good job of highlighting the fact that food banks are everywhere, and that anybody can need food. And certainly I see more people admit to having used a food bank than you would ever have seen in the past. So there has been a good job in publicising food banks, but I think the portrayal of people who use food banks will always be unfair.
I mean, the statistics are horrendous, aren't they? 9 in 10 households on universal credit have to forgo heat, food or toiletries. You all know these. 8 million people in poverty, and half of those are disabled or living in a household with disabled people in it. We obviously know about inflation. The cost of living crisis at the moment is obviously just off the scale. There's surveys that show, parents are skipping breakfast, skipping entire days of meals so that their children can eat. It's just never-ending, hideous statistics. What can we do as a country to tackle this? Are we doing enough? What are your views on what will actually make a difference?
Last year, when you look at the statistics for food bank use, last year when the 2 cost of living payments hit, there was a decrease in food bank usage. So it is, if people have more money in their pocket, then they don't go to food banks. And again, that's sort of, the media in a way don't really like that, because they think that, it plays into the sort of indolence that people, would rather take handouts. And they wouldn't. People would rather have the dignity of making their own choices in life. And so a better basic income, an increase to universal credit, a change to the benefit system. So the amount of people, again, who are penalised, who suddenly find themselves with no money. We live in a rural area and we don't have a benefits office. You have to go to Braintree or Haverhill if you're really lucky. We don't have a public transport system. And so, you might miss an appointment through absolutely no fault of your own, because you have to spend a day on public transport to get to that appointment. And then you get a benefits sanction. So there's no attention paid to the difficulties in our area that our clients face that you may not face in other areas. It's kind of, you're all treated with the same brush. So people should be able to afford the essentials in life. They shouldn't have to be making these choices. And I think my concern at the moment, especially with the cost of living, is that it's becoming normalised. We all know through COVID what we're capable of normalising. If you had said to anybody pre-COVID, well, in 6 months' time you're going to be shut in your house, and when you go out you're going to wear a mask and you can only go for an hour's walk a day, we would have said you're bonkers. But we all you take it on board, and it's proven our capacity to just and we don't look in we see in the supermarkets, we're like, oh, there's no cucumbers and tomatoes. We've normalised these really quite bizarre situations. And I think that's the same with the cost of living. And my concern is that price rises won't go back. And people who are coping will continue to cope. And those who can't cope will be forgotten about.
And are you seeing queues at your food bank? Are you seeing demand go up? Like there are some stories in the press. I agree with you. Just researching, I didn't really see a great deal of food bank sort of commentary in the press at all, just from a little bit of research. But that was one of the things, demand is increasing. Is that something that you're seeing here?
So our year goes from the 1st of April to the end of March. So it hits perfectly with when COVID struck. April 2020 to March 21 was, a crazy busy year for us because of COVID. And that was, the same for everywhere in our kind of sector. And then we expected to have a little bit of a break. We expected things to kind of go back to normal. We allow for a percentage increase per year. And we did have things did get a little bit better. And then it's just gone through the roof. It's absolutely exploded. So this year by December, so in 9 months of the year, we had done the same amount of food as we had done in the whole of the previous year. And that's, with a COVID year. So, everybody expected things to kind of taper off, and they haven't. They kind of went up and then they went down a little bit, and then they've just gone up, up, up. And that is showing no signs of abating. People who kind of need semi-regular help are not able to kind of get off the conveyor belt of help. Our biggest sector of new clients are pensioners who traditionally do not go to food banks. That generation do not ask for help. The shame attached to it is immense, and they hate asking for charity. It completely goes against the grain for them, and they ring up and they're extremely distressed, but they simply can't afford to cope any longer.
What is the cost of that demand, I guess, on as families are themselves kind of impacted by the cost of living crisis? Have you seen that impact on the number of donations that you're getting through? How are you managing that?
So we are really lucky. A lot of food banks have been really severely impacted. We're lucky. We live in an incredible community. So our donations are holding fire. At Christmas, what we find is that when things get tough, people's generosity just goes up. People who can be generous are more generous. And yeah, we were really lucky this Christmas. We got a lot of financial donations. So this time of year is when the food donations go down. So we can use that money to buy food. I used to not have to buy food until about July or August, and I would sort of go, oh my goodness me, I've just had to spend £400 on food. That's extraordinary. Well, last week I spent £4,500 on food, and I didn't blink an eye at it. And I will be spending another several £1,000s next week on food, and this is in March. And that time of year when I have to start buying food gets earlier every year, and that food then has to sort of take us through until harvest in September. So we'll have, our donations, and the majority of the giving period is from September through to about February, and then there tends to be a drop off. But we're doing fine. We're well stocked, and we've got the resources to buy the food in. But it's quite an intensive exercise to keep the food coming in.
One thing that me and my husband were talking about, we give to the food bank. We involve it in every month with our kids. We get them to, we pick some of the stuff off the list, but we have to go and look for what items you need and that sort of thing. It does feel like it's quite, that part of it must be quite laborious in terms of getting out to the public what you need at that moment, and not just having everybody buy you the same stuff all the time.
And also getting the messaging right. So we've had an incident recently. So the local paper want us to put something in every week. So we do. But sometimes we don't need the basics. We always have pasta and we always have cereal, but our food parcels encompass everything from, rice and pasta through to a bar of chocolate. It's not, it's not a kind of dry biscuit and, a bag of plain pasta. We want families to be able to provide everything they need for their children. And if you're, if you're a single man of 65 and you're living on your own, we want you to make sure that you've got a packet of biscuits with you. So if you put in the local paper, as we did, that what we really needed that week was ketchup and noodles, then you get taken to task. So the local press put in, they're in urgent need of. So we've had to change that message to say, we've had to ask the paper to say, if you are thinking of donating to the food bank this week, these are the things they would like.
And on that note, obviously, you probably know who we're going to bring up. Tory MP Lee Anderson, who said, and I'm going to direct quote his tweet here, about how there are nurses earning more than 30k and they're using food banks. They must have a budgeting problem. I have constituents, i.e. armed forces, bin men, bar staff, care workers, bus drivers, pensioners, who can all live on less. Am I missing something? How does that make you feel?
I try and feel that Lee Anderson doesn't exist. He's a soundbite politician. I mean, do people really take him seriously? I mean, he's popular because he says objectionable things. We love our data and we have a lot of it. And whenever we go to meetings, we have immediate, real data. They can say what they say. And it's an awful lot of what he says is anecdotal. We all know somebody who can, I know somebody who can survive on 10p a week. Well, I know somebody who can earn £100,000 a year and be in debt, because everybody can make different decisions in life. But the reality is that some people don't cope in life for whatever reason, and we're not here to judge them. If you want to judge people like that, then I can think of an awful lot of other people worthy of your judgment.
What are your thoughts on what the government could do to make things better? Are they doing enough? Could they do more? Do you believe they will?
I don't believe they will. They could do more, as I say. When the cost of living payments hit, fewer people needed food banks. They have announced that there will be further cost of living payments. Those are their attention getting payments. It's great that they give those payments out, but why not just simply improve the lot of people on benefits?
They're like sticking plasters, aren't
they?
They
are absolutely. Why not do something about the fuel companies and their ridiculous profits? What was that statistic that you could earn however much it was a year from the dawn of time and still not make as much as fuel profits in a day? Every government could do more, and this particular government could do quite a lot more, but hopefully we're heading towards an election reasonably soon. In all honesty, I don't know how much will change with an election. I think food banks are, there's Trussell's overarching campaign is to eradicate food banks. Let's not have food banks anymore. That's the goal. But I think once you've opened Pandora's box, if another one's going to pop up somewhere. And I think it is as much to do with austerity as it is to do with the fragmentation in social networks now. I think that people have much less access to informal networks and families. You very rarely people live where they grew up, apart from in Saffron Walden. But you often end up living somewhere different from where you grew up. So you don't have access often to family, and then especially if you live in social housing, you can be parachuted, around the place and end up somewhere where with the current housing development, all new housing developments have to have social housing, but the percentage of social housing is tiny. People living there are so isolated. They'll be parked on a housing estate on the outskirts of a town where there's no infrastructure, there's no public transport. The housing estate has been built on the basis that there'll be people living there with 2 cars and the ability to get from A to B. So I think it's more than a give people, we should be giving people more money, but we should be thinking more about how our societies are built and where people live, and the narratives around people's lives, and education, everything. Everything.
It's much bigger picture, isn't it?
Much bigger picture. There are when you're dealing with families where you have as the children grow up, they're visiting the food bank, and their parents were visiting the food bank. When you get that cycle of endemic poverty, how do you break that cycle? How do you give hope to the next generation? And that's, putting the efforts into the children, so that you give them some hope and you give them the ability to have expectations. And I think that's probably something that I'm quite passionate about.
You mentioned about the Trussell's ultimate goal is to eradicate food banks completely. In the, shorter to medium term, what does success, in inverted commas, look like for you?
From the point of view of the food bank, our goal is that anybody who needs help is able to access help and knows how to access help. Every single time I see something on Facebook of, I'm not coping, does anybody know how I can access help? Or we hear of somebody who's been struggling I get so frustrated, and I'm like, right, we just have, you just have to carry on putting that message out there and thinking of another avenue to ensure that people know how to get help. And it's living in this area, it's living in this bubble where there is no narrative. Uttlesford as a whole is wealthy, but there are wards in Uttlesford which are not wealthy. But there is no conversation around poverty in Uttlesford. As I said before about living on a housing estate, if you are struggling, you may well be living on a street where you're the only person living on that street struggling. We have clients probably who's in every single school in the area. I know full well that we have clients, and I've been into a school where I've done an assembly, and when the head teacher has stood and said, well, we're all very lucky here that none of us are in this situation. Absolutely beggars belief that a head teacher can be so blind. I would hope that that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I hope that no head teacher would be under that illusion now. I go around and I bang my drum and I do assemblies and I talk to Rotary clubs and all over the place, and I think, I can't believe that people still say, oh, what, food bank in Uttlesford? Surely there can't be much call for that. We're a rural community. Rural communities are usually, by definition, poorer than urban communities.
And personally, success?
I think learning to be content has always been something that I have strived for quite a long time, and I think it's something that takes until you're the ripe old age that I am to learn to be happy with your lot in life. I'm very lucky. I have a very nice life, contentment. I think it's an admirable goal to have.
It's working at the food bank. Has that changed do you feel like that's changed your outlook or changed you as a person at all?
It has made me realise what I'm capable of. I took over running the food bank on the 1st of March 2020.
Wow, what timing.
And that was, those 6 weeks, I've never worked harder in my life, ever. And every few days having to completely change our operations from start to finish and back again, and going, okay, right, we can do this. Nope, we can't do that. There's another thing from the government. Right, we've got to do this. We've got to do that. And it took me, we changed everything. There wasn't a single part of how we ran that we didn't change. And we lost 80% of our volunteers overnight because of shielding, because obviously our volunteers, an awful lot of them are retired. So we had to recruit 50 volunteers in 10 days and train them. And it wasn't until, as I say, about 6 weeks in, I can remember thinking, and also you're worried that you're going to get COVID and die. We all were. And I remember thinking, okay, if anything happens, I think the food bank knows how to run. But certainly for 6 weeks, it was like, I've got to keep this ship afloat, and I have to stop my volunteers from getting ill, and we have to keep feeding people. And we did it. And we did it really, really well. And then to start with as well, we had no food because people couldn't get any food from the shops. So we didn't have any donations, and our shelves emptied really quickly because also suddenly everybody needed food and we were not getting any food. And then as soon as people could get their hands on food, when it started to kind of, you could, when the supermarkets worked out how people were going to queue and how they're going to get food, and the shelves suddenly were a bit fuller again, weren't they? And as soon as people could get food, they gave it to us. And a donation started rolling in and never stopped. I learnt a lot then. And then I think since we've changed so much since then as an organisation. We had 45, 50 volunteers going into COVID. We've now got over 100. We have 3 fully functioning depots. We are distributing about 5 tons of food a month. Financially, we are, a much more complex organisation. And yeah, I've learnt that I can do that.
So for anyone listening, how can they be part of the change, whether that's volunteering at a food bank or donating? What can they do?
So I think there's 2 things, and I don't think it's food banks per se. I think it can be anything. I think at a kind of macro level is don't accept the status quo. I always get asked, I get asked this when I kind of talk to churches or do something like this, and they say, what can we do? And they're expecting me to say, give a jar of peanut butter. And I'm like, use your vote. Don't accept food banks as normality. Don't accept the conditions that people live in as normal. Do what it takes to change that. Some people, I'm lucky enough that I have the material ability to volunteer in the way that I do. Some people don't. But I think it's asking yourself what you can do. So is it that, you've got the ability to write a letter? Is it that you've got the ability to share? You've only got, you both have young families. You've probably got 5 minutes if you're lucky. Whether that's sharing something on social media. Is it that you've have the courage to have conversations with those members of your family that maybe kind of, have opinions out there? It doesn't have to be about food banks. There's so many issues around at the moment that are divisive. The whole trans issue, for example, You know, everybody has an opinion. And I think it's looking at yourself. If you feel frustrated by what's out there, you don't have to go and volunteer an hour of your time. Maybe you can in the future, but maybe there is a campaign that you can get involved in. Maybe it's that somebody needs some, letters written. I mean, we have volunteers, not all our volunteers work in the warehouse. We have volunteers that just sit at home and process data for us because that's what they can do. And they're really happy doing it. They don't want to be in, a lot of our volunteers want to be among people. And so they want to be in the warehouse, but some people don't. Some people want to be at home and do something sat from a desk. And so I think it's just looking at what your own strengths are. As I say, my strengths are, kind of just being a bit of a pain in the neck to a lot of people and persuading people to do things. So it's what are your strengths as a human being that you can donate to somebody in whatever way. Maybe it's the fact that you've got some money that you can spare. That's great. Give it to somebody who can help. Especially around here, when you see on the mummies sites and you see people saying, oh, I've got this and I've got that and I want to give it to somebody who can use it, or when we've had situation in Ukraine, or now the situation in Turkey, and it's like I want to give something. All I ever want to say is sell it and give the money to somebody. That's what. Give it to the professionals so that they can do, the people who know what to do. So, take your clothes and take your toys, put them on eBay, sell them and give the money. But yeah, not everybody can do everything. And it's just asking yourself what you have the time and the wherewithal to do.
As we draw this episode to a close, are there any final reflections from you?
The most affecting case I've ever had was an 18-year-old boy. You can legally be a man, but you're an 18-year-old boy who had been discharged from hospital following a violent assault, and was put into temporary accommodation in a village in the middle of nowhere, recovering from horrific injuries, no family, no nothing. And thankfully a neighbour who hadn't known this boy beforehand sort of stepped in and effectively mothered him. And all we could do was provide food. I think we also bought him a microwave because he didn't have, if you put into temporary accommodation, you don't have anything. And he was the one that I learned from because I wanted to rescue him and I couldn't take away anything that had happened to him. It had been horrific. He's the one I had to step away from and get help for, and do what we could. But the good thing is we helped him a couple of times and then I've never heard from him again. And that's the best, one of the most tragic cases, but also it's when you help somebody and you never hear from them again. Because what you've done is provide what was needed at a time that it was needed. And I could tell you another hundreds of stories of the same, if people knew what was happening on their doorsteps here through absolutely no fault of their own, the circumstances, it can be through illness, it can be through death of a partner, you can lose your job. If you have nothing to fall back on, why are you not deserving of help? I just don't understand it. If, people who spout this nonsense, if they saw somebody in the street who needed help, would they step over them? I'm sure they like to think that, they're good, moral, upstanding people. So if you wouldn't step over somebody lying in the street because they've injured themselves, why would you step over somebody metaphorically? Just help people. It's not that difficult, really. There's just people in need. It's just, reach your hand out, ask what you can do to help.
Thank you so much. That's such a powerful way to summarise, I think, everything we've spoken about in this conversation. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sophie. It's been lovely to talk to you today.
You're more than welcome. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Sophie for such an honest and powerful conversation. If you've enjoyed listening to this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate and review. This has been The Changemakers.